For years, royal watchers believed the most valuable treasures inside the royal family were safely accounted for, carefully protected by tradition, protocol, and generations of royal stewardship. But behind palace walls, a dispute over one remarkable sapphire collection has suddenly raised questions nobody expected to ask. Why would Princess, and reportedly demand the return of jewels connected to Queen Camilla's family circle? And how did Camilla's daughter find herself at the center of a controversy that has left royal insiders stunned? What happened next would open a conversation about ownership, legacy, and power that stretches far beyond a collection of precious stones. At first glance, the disagreement appeared to be about jewelry. A collection of historic sapphires, admired for decades and associated with some of the most recognizable figures in modern royal history, suddenly became the focus of intense discussion behind closed doors. Yet as royal observers began piecing together fragments of information, it became increasingly clear that the real issue was not the sapphires themselves. The real issue was what those sapphires represented. For members of the royal family, jewels have never been simple accessories. Every tiara, necklace, bracelet, and brooch carries a story. Some pieces commemorate marriages. Others symbolize diplomatic relationships between nations. Many are connected to queens, princesses, and future kings whose decisions shaped the monarchy for generations. Because of that history, questions about ownership can quickly evolve into questions about legitimacy, responsibility, and royal duty. According to several royal commentators, concerns began emerging when certain sapphire pieces appeared to be associated more closely with Queen Camilla's personal family connections than with the wider royal household. While public attention remained focused on appearances, ceremonies, and official engagements, discussions were reportedly taking place elsewhere regarding which jewels belonged to individuals and which belonged to the institution itself. And that is where Princess and reportedly entered the conversation. Unlike many senior royals who attract headlines through public appearances, Princess and has spent decades developing a reputation for discipline, precision, and unwavering commitment to royal responsibility. Royal watchers often describe Princess, and as one of the monarchy's most practical figures, someone who tends to focus less on publicity and more on protecting the long-term interests of the institution. So when reports began circulating that Princess and had allegedly questioned the status of several sapphire pieces, people immediately took notice. Why would Princess and become involved? What exactly had Princess and discovered? And perhaps most importantly, why was Princess and reportedly insisting that the collection be returned? Those questions quickly transformed a quiet internal matter into something far more intriguing. Observers began examining the larger context surrounding the situation. The monarchy is currently navigating a period of enormous transition. King Charles III continues shaping his reign while Prince William, the future king, assumes greater visibility and responsibility. Catherine, Princess of Wales, remains one of the most influential and admired members of the royal family, while public interest surrounding the future direction of the monarchy remains exceptionally high. In such an environment, even relatively small disputes can acquire enormous symbolic significance. What made the situation especially uncomfortable was the suggestion that Camilla's daughter may have believed there was little reason to expect a challenge. From one perspective, the matter may have appeared settled. From another perspective, however, Princess and reportedly viewed the issue through a very different lens. For Princess, and, according to some royal commentators, the question was not who appreciated the jewels or who had access to them. The question was whether royal assets connected to the crown should remain tied to the institution rather than individual family branches. That distinction may sound technical, but inside royal circles it can become incredibly important. A sapphire necklace is not merely a sapphire necklace when it has appeared during state occasions, diplomatic receptions, or historic royal events. A sapphire tiara is not simply an expensive piece of jewelry when it carries decades of royal symbolism attached to it. In those circumstances, ownership becomes intertwined with history itself. As discussion intensified, attention inevitably shifted toward Camilla's daughter. Royal commentators noted that being drawn into such a dispute would place anyone in an uncomfortable position. Regardless of intentions, suddenly finding oneself connected to questions about royal property creates a difficult public perception challenge. Every action becomes scrutinized. Every photograph gets analyzed. Every statement generates new speculation. That is precisely why many observers describe the situation as humiliating. Not necessarily because of anything that was proven, but because public discussion itself can become damaging when royal reputations are involved. Meanwhile, Princess Anne reportedly remained unmoved by emotional arguments and focused instead on procedure. Those familiar with Princess Anne's approach often note that Princess Anne rarely backs away from difficult conversations when institutional responsibilities are at stake. Whether dealing with ceremonial matters, charitable commitments, or internal royal concerns, Princess Anne has built a reputation for confronting issues directly rather than allowing uncertainty to linger.
But if Princess Anne was determined to resolve the matter, another question soon emerged. How would Queen Camilla respond? Would King Charles III become involved? And where would Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, stand if the disagreement continued to escalate? Those questions would soon transform a dispute about sapphires into something much larger, a debate about authority, succession, and who ultimately safeguards the monarchy's most valuable traditions. Before long, royal insiders were no longer discussing gemstones. They were discussing power. And that is where this story becomes far more complicated. If Princess Anne believed the Sapphire collection represented institutional property, what evidence convinced Princess Anne to take such a firm position in the first place? And could that evidence change everything royal watchers thought they understood about the collection's history? Before we uncover that answer, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of royal watchers, because the next development would reportedly place several senior members of the royal family in an unexpectedly difficult position. The deeper royal observers examined the Sapphire dispute, the more they began focusing on a detail that had initially received very little attention. Princess Anne was not known for launching challenges without preparation, and that reality led many commentators to ask a critical question. If Princess Anne was reportedly demanding the return of the Sapphire collection, what information had convinced Princess Anne that such a demand was necessary in the first place? That question quickly shifted attention away from the jewels themselves and toward the history surrounding them. For decades, members of the royal family have operated within a complex system that separates personal possessions from items connected to the crown. On paper, the distinction may appear straightforward. In practice, however, generations of inheritances, gifts, trusts, and family arrangements can create situations where ownership becomes remarkably difficult to define. Some royal commentators began suggesting that the Sapphire collection sat directly within that complicated territory. What if certain pieces had been viewed differently by different members of the family? What if assumptions made years earlier were now being challenged? And perhaps most importantly, what if records existed that painted a very different picture from the one many people believed? Those questions reportedly became increasingly important as Princess Anne continued examining the matter. Unlike public controversies that unfold through newspaper headlines and television appearances, this situation appeared to develop through private conversations and internal reviews. That alone made the story more intriguing. When senior royals avoid public discussion while quietly addressing an issue behind palace walls, experienced royal watchers immediately recognize that something significant may be taking place. Meanwhile, Camilla's daughter reportedly found herself facing growing scrutiny. From the outside, many observers viewed the situation sympathetically. After all, becoming involved in a dispute concerning royal assets places an individual in an almost impossible position. Regardless of intentions, the public often interprets events through symbolism rather than facts. Once a narrative begins forming, perceptions can spread rapidly. As a result, commentators increasingly described Camilla's daughter as being caught in the middle of a much larger institutional debate. Yet Princess Anne reportedly showed little interest in public perception. According to royal analysts, Princess Anne's concern remained focused on protecting established royal practices and ensuring that important historical assets remained where Princess Anne believed they belonged. That determination surprised very few people familiar with Princess Anne's reputation. Throughout decades of public service, Princess Anne has earned respect for approaching royal responsibilities with unusual directness. While other members of the royal family may attract greater media attention, Princess Anne has often been viewed as one of the institution's most dependable figures, consistently prioritizing duty over popularity. Could that same mindset explain why Princess Anne was refusing to step back from the Sapphire issue? Some observers certainly believed so. At the same time, another fascinating dimension began emerging. Several royal commentators noted that the timing of the dispute could not be ignored. The monarchy is currently preparing for its future in ways both visible and invisible. Prince William continues assuming greater responsibilities as future king. Catherine, Princess of Wales, remains central to public confidence in the royal family. King Charles III continues balancing the demands of his reign while guiding the institution through a period of transition. Within that broader context, decisions involving royal assets suddenly carry additional significance.
Why?
Because every action taken today helps define how future generations will manage the monarchy tomorrow. That reality transformed the Sapphire collection into something far larger than a disagreement over valuable gemstones. It became a test of principles. Would historical precedent prevail? Would family relationships influence the outcome? Or would institutional priorities ultimately take precedence over personal considerations? As those questions circulated, royal insiders reportedly continued examining documentation connected to the collection's history. While very little information emerged publicly, speculation intensified regarding what those records might reveal. And this is where the situation became even more interesting. Some commentators began suggesting that Princess Anne's confidence may have come from evidence that had not yet entered public discussion. If true, that possibility would explain why Princess Anne appeared willing to maintain such a firm position despite the sensitivity of the matter. But if Princess Anne possessed information strong enough to justify demanding the return of the collection, then another question immediately followed. What exactly was contained within those records? And could those details fundamentally change the way King Charles III, Prince William, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, viewed the entire situation? That possibility would soon place the spotlight on a forgotten chapter of royal history, one that may hold the key to understanding why the Sapphire collection suddenly became one of the most talked about issues behind palace walls. If the first phase of the Sapphire controversy centered on ownership, the next phase focused on something potentially even more important: history. As palace discussions reportedly continued behind closed doors, attention began shifting toward the origins of the collection itself, and that shift introduced an entirely new layer of complexity. For years, many royal observers had simply assumed that the Sapphire pieces existed within a clearly understood framework. Yet as questions multiplied, commentators began asking whether the collection's journey through the decades was actually far more complicated than anyone realized. And if that was true, why had those questions remained dormant for so long? The answer may lie in the unique nature of royal history itself. Within the royal family, objects often acquire significance far beyond their monetary value. A piece of jewelry may begin as a gift, later become associated with official duties, and eventually evolve into a symbol of royal continuity. By the time several generations have passed, determining exactly where personal ownership ends and institutional responsibility begins can become extraordinarily difficult. According to some royal analysts, that challenge may have been sitting at the heart of the Sapphire dispute from the very beginning. As Princess Anne reportedly continued reviewing historical information, interest grew around documents connected to earlier periods of royal administration. While very little has been publicly confirmed, commentators began speculating that records from previous decades could potentially clarify how the collection was originally intended to be managed. If such records existed, their significance would be enormous.
Why?
Because the debate would no longer revolve around personal opinions or family expectations. Instead, the discussion would revolve around documented royal precedent. And royal precedent carries considerable weight inside the monarchy. This possibility reportedly created growing anticipation among those following the story. Many observers believed that whatever evidence Princess Anne was relying upon had to be substantial. After all, Princess Anne's reputation has never been associated with impulsive decision-making. Princess Anne is widely viewed as methodical, disciplined, and deeply committed to preserving institutional standards. That reputation led many commentators to draw a fascinating conclusion. Perhaps Princess Anne was not trying to challenge anyone personally. Perhaps Princess Anne believed Princess Anne was defending a principle. That distinction may seem subtle, but it changes the entire interpretation of the story. If the issue was personal, compromise might be relatively simple. If the issue was institutional, however, the stakes become dramatically higher. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about one collection. It becomes about future expectations throughout the royal family. What precedent would be established if questions surrounding ownership were left unresolved? How might future generations interpret such decisions? And what message would it send regarding royal stewardship? Those concerns reportedly resonated strongly among individuals focused on the long-term stability of the monarchy. Meanwhile, public interest continued growing. Every new report generated additional speculation. Every royal appearance prompted fresh analysis. Even routine engagements became opportunities for commentators to search for clues regarding the status of the Sapphire collection. Yet despite the growing attention, one important figure remained noticeably quiet: King Charles III. Royal observers found this particularly interesting because King Charles III occupies a uniquely difficult position within the situation. On one hand, King Charles III must consider family relationships and personal sensitivities. On the other hand, King Charles III also serves as guardian of the institution itself. Balancing those responsibilities is rarely simple. And when respected senior figures such as Princess Anne become involved, the challenge becomes even greater. Could King Charles III remain neutral? Would King Charles III eventually be forced to make a definitive ruling? Or was a private resolution already being negotiated behind palace walls? Nobody seemed entirely certain. At the same time, another intriguing development began attracting attention. Several commentators suggested that Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, may have been watching the situation very carefully, even if they remained publicly silent. As the future king and future queen, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, have a direct interest in questions involving royal continuity, institutional integrity, and the management of historically significant assets. That reality added yet another layer to the story. Because if future generations of royals were paying close attention, the Sapphire dispute might ultimately influence decisions extending far beyond the current moment. And that possibility raised, perhaps, the most important question so far. What would happen if the historical records Princess Anne reportedly relied upon were finally reviewed by all senior members of the royal family? Would those records immediately settle the matter? Would they strengthen Princess Anne's position? Or could they reveal unexpected details that nobody had anticipated? Whatever the answer, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The Sapphire collection was no longer merely a collection. It had become a symbol of legacy, authority, and the ongoing struggle to balance family interests with the responsibilities of the crown. And as more information reportedly began surfacing from the past, the next development would place several senior royals in a position they may never have expected to face. By the time the Sapphire controversy reached this stage, the conversation inside royal circles was no longer centered on who possessed the collection. The focus had shifted towards something much larger and potentially far more consequential: the future authority of the monarchy itself. What had started as a disagreement over a collection of historic jewels was now being viewed through the lens of royal governance, succession planning, and institutional control. And according to several royal commentators, that transformation changed everything. The reason was surprisingly simple. When disputes involve ordinary family heirlooms, solutions are often found through private agreements. But when the items in question carry royal significance, every decision establishes a precedent. Every judgment becomes part of a larger framework that future generations may eventually rely upon. Princess Anne reportedly understood that reality better than most. After decades of service within the royal family, Princess Anne has witnessed periods of celebration, periods of crisis, and periods of profound institutional change. That experience has given Princess Anne a perspective that many observers believe is uniquely valuable during moments of uncertainty. As a result, some royal analysts began suggesting that Princess Anne's determination was never truly about the Sapphire collection itself. Instead, Princess Anne may have been focused on safeguarding the principle that historically significant royal assets should remain protected for future generations rather than becoming subjects of confusion or competing claims. If that interpretation is correct, it would explain why Princess Anne reportedly refused to soften her position despite growing attention surrounding the matter. But that same determination created a new problem. Because the longer the disagreement continued, the greater the risk of public scrutiny. And public scrutiny is something the monarchy rarely welcomes when internal matters are involved. Royal institutions depend heavily upon stability, continuity, and public confidence. Whenever disputes become visible, commentators immediately begin searching for deeper meanings. Was this simply an administrative disagreement? Was it evidence of broader tensions? Or was it a sign that competing visions existed regarding the monarchy's future direction? Those questions quickly gained momentum. Meanwhile, Camilla's daughter reportedly found herself under increasing pressure as media interest intensified. Regardless of personal involvement, becoming associated with a high-profile royal dispute can be deeply uncomfortable. Many observers pointed out that perception often becomes reality in the public arena. Even when facts remain unclear, narratives can develop rapidly. That reality may explain why commentators increasingly describe the situation as personally difficult for everyone involved. Yet despite growing speculation, one remarkable detail continued attracting attention. Neither King Charles III nor Prince William appeared eager to fuel public discussion. In fact, many royal watchers interpreted their silence as evidence that sensitive conversations were likely occurring privately. And that possibility introduced another fascinating question. What if senior royals were already attempting to resolve the issue behind closed doors? After all, public confrontation would benefit nobody. A private resolution would preserve dignity. A private resolution would protect relationships. Most importantly, a private resolution would allow the institution to move forward without unnecessary division. However, achieving such an outcome would require agreement. And agreement can be difficult when principles are involved. This is where Catherine, Princess of Wales, enters the broader discussion. Although Catherine, Princess of Wales, has not been publicly linked to the dispute in any official capacity, royal commentators frequently note Catherine's growing influence within the modern monarchy. Over recent years, Catherine, Princess of Wales, has become one of the most trusted and respected members of the royal family, admired for balancing public popularity with a strong commitment to royal duty. That reputation has led some observers to speculate that Catherine, Princess of Wales, may represent the type of leadership increasingly shaping the monarchy's future. A leadership style focused less on personal interests and more on long-term institutional stability. Could that same philosophy eventually influence how disputes, such as the Sapphire controversy, are resolved? Many commentators believe it could, because at its core, this story is no longer about gemstones. It is about stewardship. It is about responsibility. It is about deciding who safeguards history and how that responsibility should be exercised. As these discussions reportedly continued, attention began turning toward one final issue: the evidence. What exactly had Princess Anne reportedly reviewed that inspired such confidence? Why did Princess Anne appear so certain that the collection should be returned? And perhaps most intriguingly of all, what would happen if those findings were eventually presented to the highest levels of royal decision-making? The answers to those questions could determine not only the future of the Sapphire collection but also how future generations of royals approach similar challenges. Because sometimes the most significant battles inside a monarchy are not fought in public. They are fought quietly, behind palace walls, through decisions that may never fully become known. And according to royal observers, the next development would reportedly bring the Sapphire controversy to its most dramatic and decisive moment yet. As the reported dispute over the Sapphire collection approached its most critical stage, many royal commentators began arriving at the same conclusion. Regardless of how the matter was ultimately resolved, the controversy had already exposed something far more important than questions of ownership. It had exposed the delicate balance that exists between family, duty, tradition, and power inside the royal family. For weeks, attention had focused on Princess Anne's reported insistence that the Sapphire collection be returned. Questions had surrounded Camilla's daughter. Speculation had grown regarding historical records, royal precedent, and institutional responsibility. Yet beneath all those discussions was a larger issue that could not easily be ignored. Who truly serves as the guardian of royal history? That question may sound simple, but within a monarchy that stretches back centuries, the answer is anything but straightforward. Every generation inherits more than titles and responsibilities. Every generation inherits decisions made long before they arrived. Every generation becomes responsible for preserving traditions while simultaneously preparing the institution for the future. According to royal observers, that reality may explain why Princess Anne reportedly remained so determined throughout the controversy. Princess Anne has spent decades witnessing the consequences of decisions that appeared minor in the moment, but later carried enormous significance. What seems like a disagreement over a collection today can become an important precedent tomorrow. And if Princess Anne genuinely believed the Sapphire collection represented something that belonged within the wider royal household, then stepping aside may never have been viewed as a realistic option. Yet that interpretation creates another fascinating perspective. Perhaps the story was never about Princess Anne challenging Camilla's daughter. Perhaps the story was about Princess Anne defending what Princess Anne believed future generations should inherit. That distinction changes the entire narrative. Because viewed through that lens, the disagreement becomes less personal and more institutional, less emotional and more historical, less about individuals and more about legacy. Meanwhile, commentators continued examining what the controversy revealed about the monarchy's future leadership. Prince William, the future king, represents the next chapter of the institution. Catherine, Princess of Wales, remains one of the monarchy's most trusted and admired figures. King Charles III continues navigating the responsibilities of a reign unfolding during a period of significant change. Each of those senior royals faces the same fundamental challenge. How do you modernize an ancient institution without losing the traditions that define it? The Sapphire dispute may seem small compared to constitutional matters or state occasions, but controversies like these often reveal how leaders approach larger questions. Do they prioritize relationships? Do they prioritize precedent? Do they prioritize public perception? Or do they prioritize the institution itself? Those are not always the same thing. And that reality is what made the reported controversy so compelling to royal watchers around the world. As discussion continued, many observers also reflected upon the uncomfortable position in which Camilla's daughter reportedly found herself. Whether fairly or unfairly, becoming associated with a debate involving royal assets can create enormous pressure. Public narratives often develop quickly, and once attention focuses on a particular individual, separating fact from interpretation becomes increasingly difficult. That is why some commentators argued that the true lesson of the controversy extends beyond any single person. The lesson concerns the extraordinary challenges that accompany proximity to the monarchy itself. Every decision is scrutinized. Every relationship is analyzed. Every disagreement can become a headline. And every action carries consequences far beyond what most families could ever imagine. Perhaps that is why the reported Sapphire dispute captured so much interest. People were not merely discussing jewels. People were discussing responsibility. People were discussing heritage. People were discussing the invisible structures that keep one of the world's most famous institutions functioning across generations. And even now, many questions remain unanswered. Were the reports entirely accurate? Did Princess Anne possess evidence strong enough to justify such a firm position? How did King Charles III reportedly view the situation behind closed doors? What role, if any, did Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, play in the discussions? And, most importantly, what final decision was reached regarding the Sapphire collection itself? Those answers may never be fully known outside royal circles. But perhaps that uncertainty is precisely why stories like this continue to fascinate the public. The monarchy has always existed at the intersection of history and mystery. Some chapters are written in public view. Others remain hidden behind palace walls. And occasionally, a story emerges that reminds everyone just how much remains unseen.
So what do you think?
Did Princess Anne simply act as a protector of royal tradition? Or was this reported dispute about something much larger than a collection of sapphires? Do you believe institutional responsibility should always come before personal connections? Or should family considerations carry equal weight when royal history is involved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy thoughtful discussions about Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Queen Camilla, and the future of the royal family, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal deep dive. Because sometimes the most revealing royal stories are not the ones that make the official announcements. They are the ones that raise questions nobody expected to ask.